Welcome back everyone to Hidden History Stories. In today's episode, we're uncovering the rise of a man who turned disaster into power and how an earthquake shattered Lisbon, yet rebuilt an empire. Every story from the past holds a lesson, and this one shows how tragedy can spark bold reform and reveal the cost of absolute power. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share it with anyone who loves exploring the past. And let me know in the comments, what is your favorite historical era? Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's begin. The ground shook, the sea rose, and Lisbon burned. In a single morning, one of Europe's great capitals was reduced to ashes, and from that ruin, a ruthless visionary would rebuild not only a city, but an empire. On the morning of November 1, 1755, as Lisbon citizens gathered for All Saints' Day Mass, the earth beneath Portugal's magnificent capital began to tremble. What followed would reshape not only the city itself, but transform Portuguese colonial administration across 3 continents. This is the extraordinary story of how one man, Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, later known as the Marquis of Pombal, seized upon catastrophe to modernize an empire. At approximately 9:40 a.m., the first of 3 massive earthquakes struck Lisbon. Buildings that had stood for centuries crumbled in minutes. The royal palace, countless churches, and thousands of homes collapsed, trapping residents beneath tons of stone and timber. Those who survived the initial quake fled toward the Tagus River, seeking open space away from falling debris. But nature wasn't finished. Within an hour, enormous tsunami waves, some reaching heights of 20 feet, surged up the Tagus estuary and crashed into the city's waterfront. The waves swept away survivors who had gathered along the river, destroyed the port, and penetrated far inland. Ships were carried hundreds of yards from their moorings and deposited in city squares. As if earthquake and tsunami weren't enough, fires ignited by overturned candles and oil lamps began spreading through the debris-filled streets. The flames would burn for 5 days, consuming what the earthquake had left standing. By the time the catastrophe ended, an estimated 60 people had perished, and 85% of Lisbon's buildings lay in ruins. King José I, traumatized by the disaster and never comfortable with governance, turned to his Secretary of State for Internal Affairs, Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo. This minor nobleman from the provinces had spent years as an ambassador in London and Vienna, observing Enlightenment ideas about rational government and economic development. Now, with Lisbon in ashes, he saw an unprecedented opportunity. Carvalho e Melo moved swiftly and decisively. While others debated theological explanations for the disaster, he focused on practical solutions. "Bury the dead and feed the living," he reportedly declared when asked about priorities. He organized relief efforts, prevented disease outbreaks, and maintained order through martial law. Most importantly, he began planning not just to rebuild Lisbon, but to reconstruct it better than before. Rather than simply clearing rubble and rebuilding haphazardly, Carvalho e Melo commissioned a complete redesign of downtown Lisbon. He brought in military engineers Manuel de Maia and Eugenio dos Santos to create something unprecedented, a planned city built on rational principles. The new Lisbon would feature wide, straight streets in a grid pattern, revolutionary for medieval Europe. Buildings would be constructed using flexible wooden frameworks called gaiola, cage, construction, designed to withstand future earthquakes. Uniform building heights and architectural styles would create visual harmony. The downtown area, known as the Baxa, became one of Europe's first examples of comprehensive urban planning. But Carvalho e Melo's ambitions extended far beyond architecture. He used the reconstruction as an opportunity to reshape Portuguese society and its colonial empire. He expelled the powerful Jesuit order, which had dominated education and wielded enormous influence in the colonies. He established new schools based on Enlightenment principles, promoted commerce and manufacturing, and began professionalizing the colonial administration. The earthquake's aftermath allowed Carvalho e Melo, now elevated to Marquis of Pombal, to implement sweeping colonial reforms that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. In Brazil, he established the state of Grão-Pará and Maranhão as a separate administrative unit to better govern the Amazon region. He founded the General Company for Grão-Pará and Maranhão to develop trade and combat Dutch and French incursions. Perhaps most remarkably, Pombal promoted the marriage of Portuguese colonists to indigenous women in Brazil, granting them equal status with Portuguese-born citizens. He abolished indigenous slavery in northern Brazil and established new towns where mixed-race families could prosper. In India, Pombal strengthened Portuguese positions in Goa, Daman, and Diu by reorganizing the colonial government and improving fortifications. He established new trading companies and encouraged local industries. Similar reforms occurred in Portuguese Africa, where he reorganized the administration of Angola and Mozambique. To fund reconstruction and colonial expansion, Pombal revolutionized Portugal's economy. He established the Royal Company of Agriculture of the Vineyards of the Upper Douro, creating one of the world's first officially demarcated wine regions and establishing quality controls that made port wine internationally famous. He founded the Aula do Comércio, a commercial college that trained merchants and administrators in modern business practices. Manufacturing was promoted through protective tariffs and state support. Pombal also reformed the colonial diamond trade in Brazil, establishing the Diamond District in Minas Gerais with strict controls over extraction and export. This generated enormous wealth while preventing the kind of contraband trade that had enriched foreign merchants at Portugal's expense. Pombal's reforms faced fierce resistance from traditional elites. The nobility resented his attacks on their privileges, while merchants opposed new regulations and taxes. The expulsion of the Jesuits created powerful enemies in Rome and among devout Catholics throughout the empire. The most dramatic confrontation came in 1758 when several nobles, including the Duke of Aveiro and the Marquis of Tavora, allegedly conspired to assassinate King José I. Whether the conspiracy was real or fabricated by Pombal remains debated by historians. Regardless, Pombal used the affair to crush his aristocratic opponents. The conspirators were tortured and executed in public spectacles designed to demonstrate his power. This episode revealed Pombal's darker side. His methods could be ruthless, and his secret police monitored potential opponents throughout the empire. Political prisoners were held in terrible conditions, and dissent was brutally suppressed. When King José I died in 1777, his daughter Maria I immediately dismissed Pombal and reversed many of his policies. However, the structural changes he had implemented proved lasting. Lisbon remained rebuilt according to his rational plan, and many colonial reforms continued. The administrative innovations Pombal introduced in Brazil proved particularly significant. The provinces he established became the foundation for Brazil's later federal system. The promotion of mixed marriages and indigenous rights, while imperfectly implemented, created precedents for more inclusive colonial policies. The trading companies he founded continued operating for decades, shaping economic development across the Portuguese Empire. Perhaps most importantly, Pombal demonstrated how crisis could become opportunity. By seizing upon the earthquake's destruction, he modernized institutions that might otherwise have resisted change for generations. The Lisbon earthquake and Pombal's response resonated throughout Europe. Voltaire wrote about the disaster in Candide, using it to critique philosophical optimism. The earthquake influenced Enlightenment thinking about natural disasters, government response, and the relationship between state power and individual welfare. Pombal's urban planning principles influenced city development across Europe and the colonies. His economic policies provided models for state-directed development that other nations studied and sometimes copied. The administrative reforms he implemented became templates for colonial governance that outlasted the Portuguese Empire itself. The story of Pombal and the Lisbon earthquake illustrates how individual leadership, historical circumstances, and geographic factors intersected to reshape colonial empires. It demonstrates that European colonialism was not simply a story of expansion and exploitation, but also involved complex processes of institutional innovation, cultural adaptation, and administrative experimentation. From the rubble of a destroyed city emerged new forms of colonial governance that would influence development across 3 continents for generations. The earthquake that devastated Lisbon in 1755 ultimately became a catalyst for one of the most comprehensive reform programs in colonial history, showing how disaster and opportunity could intertwine in the complex story of European expansion. That was the story of the Marquis of Pombal, the man who rebuilt Lisbon from ashes and reshaped an empire through vision, power, and iron will. If you found this story fascinating, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss more hidden history stories.